Sabrina, you still gonna ask me about the question about Sean? Because I
Yeah.
got that information.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, good. Yeah, maybe we could do that in the beginning with the parts where you and Michelle just be talking,
Okay.
right? Before we get into the
We've been
topic,
strong for
okay?
so long. Now it's time to rise. No more dimming our light. Let it shine so bright. Breaking chains,
Woo!
breaking downs. We reclaim our crown.
Clean her up.
Standing tall. Here is roar. We ain't backing down. We are queens. We are fire. We are born to be bold. Writing history, rewriting what the world has been told. No more limits, no more waiting. Feel the power inside. It's a moment, a season. Watch us open. We rise again, stronger than ever. Never we own our space. Greatest God.
All right, all right, all right, all right, all right, all right. Happy Monday. Happy Monday, Facebook family. Happy Monday, YouTube family. Happy Monday to everybody who has joined us on the SID podcast. I am your host, Sabrina. We have our host, Natasha McCartney. Hey, Tosh.
Happy Monday, everybody. I'm Natasha McCartney, your licensed psychotherapist. Today, ready to break down why communication either builds or break a relationship. But I think Sabrina has a question for me, stemming
Woo!
from of all of you who joined us last week from our relationship and couple segment.
Yeah, so last week was so amazing. I got so much good feedback. We talked about couples, right? And the reason why that session was so good, especially for me, is because what it showed was number one, the longevity in your relationship. We had two couples on last week. We had Natasha and we had her husband Sean on. And then we had Rodney and his wife Danny on. And both, oh my God, Tasha and Sean married 28 years, 29 years. Danny and Rodney, 39 years. And so it was important for me to bring them on, Michelle and I, and she'll be on shortly, just to talk about that longevity and what it looks like, and just to show the world that it's not Prince Charming, right? Coming to get you on a white horse, my thoughts. Hey, May May, good to see you. And so Sean said something last week was so as you know, our conversation this week is going to be around communication, which I think is a pivotal part of a relationship. Without good communication or the breakdown of communication, that could really impact any relationship, whether it's husband and wife, mother and your children, work. So communication is key. But Sean said something last week, Tasha, that I really wanted to ask you about because I'm sure a lot of people probably want to know the same question. One of the things he said was when he met you, even though you were assertive, or what's the word that you used last week? You
He,
were
he called it the thick armor, that he could see through the armor. He could see
right.
right through me.
He saw
Hey,
through the
welcome to
armor.
Golden Link is here.
The golden link is in. And so he said he saw through you, and
Yes,
which was so amazing because I think I heard him say, I so he said, I see you. And I think
yes.
that's what a lot of people aim for, is for their partner to actually see them. So what was it that made Sean actually see you? Did you guys ever discuss it, talk about it? What was it that made him break that hard exterior just to get to that soft interior? What was it?
Yes. So, in full transparency, I'm sure over the 28 years we've been together, or 33 years we've been together, but the 28 years married, we did talk about that, but as we were preparing for today's discussion, I said, "Oh, Sabrina, I'm gonna have to go back and ask him because I don't know, I can't remember what he said."
Right.
So I did my homework assignment, and I think the answer was perfect because it really, what I'm about to tell you guys, actually lead into a version of nonverbal communication, and we're going to be talking about.
Mm.
Can you hear me now in the power of communication, right? So I went to Sean and I said, "Hey, I got a homework assignment. They're going to ask me a question about something you said last week as a follow up." And the question was, remember when you said, and this was really early on in the relationship, that you could see through my tough exterior, you could see through my armor, and that made it a lot more attractive to you and more appealing to you. Besides him obviously wanting to be the king of the jungle to conquer me, right? It wasn't his first motive. I'm
Is
just
that what it
joking. But
was?
right, right. But he said of some really profound things. He said it wasn't just the what he could see, but he said he remember moments in my armor where I would let him peek into the soft side. So I was
Mm.
non-verbally communicating to him somehow, some way that I had a softer side. So I said, look, we're going to be live on the podcast. Hopefully thousands of people are listening. So you're going to have to give us an example of that. Like, cause I
Right.
don't remember this. So he gave two good examples. One of the examples he gave was when we first met. Obviously we met in college. He was playing ball, and he definitely, he'll be the first one to tell you, like, I love coming to school to socialize, but I ain't there for the schoolwork. And that when we would study together, and that was one of my boundaries when he was trying to pick me up. One of my lines was like, well, you got to meet me in the library because you don't pick me up on the street corner,
That's a
right?
I
good one.
like
I
and
that
like
and
one.
that
he had
one.
never, yeah, he never knew what the library looked like. And I was saying that as I was walking through the library. So he said that I was so gracious in helping him and so enthusiastic to teach and respond and really committed to him doing well in his classes, that he saw that as a soft part. But this was the really one that I think the fans will love and everyone who's listening. So the second example, because he had to think about it too, so I think that gave him time to think. He said what really got him was the first time he called us on the telephone. So back then, you guys, we ain't had no cell phones or no
Right,
pages. He
right,
called on the landline.
Or the
right.
And he
pager.
said and I do not remember this at all. I was a tough cookie because I used to just be, I was setting my boundaries, but I didn't even know I was setting my boundaries. I was just being in my element and being true to
Right.
myself, and I guess putting out to the world what I thought or knew I deserved.
Which is
So
a
he said when
communication,
he first,
a form of
yeah, when he
communication.
first called me, he must have said, "Hey, what's up?" on the phone, and he remember diligently. I said, "Look, if you calling a young lady, you don't ask her what's up. Don't talk to me like I'm a chick off the street corner." And he never
Ooh.
Mm.
forgot that. So what he said, what that was not me just being prissy or trying to be tough, but he knew the way I said it. He could hear in the communication that I was sending him a message, and he knew that message wasn't for him because he knew the type of guy he was. He
Mm-hmm.
didn't think he was picking me up on
Mm-hmm.
the street corner. So here, and me unknowingly, I was communicating maybe from a trauma response
Mm-hmm.
to, but I was also simultaneously setting a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
And as opposed of him focusing on the trauma response, he accepted the boundary. I said, when you call me, you say, "Hey, Natasha, how are you doing?" I actually even gave him an example of how I wanted him to speak to me. And he said that's when he saw through me and saw the softer side, because the toughness was, again, what he didn't label as a trauma response, but he said specifically to me today, "I knew how you were responding to me. That wasn't for me. It had to be something from your past experiences." So that didn't frighten him. He wanted to show me a new experience.
And you want to hear something
So that's
funny?
the answer to his question.
That is excellent. And what I like about what you just said is two things. The first thing is you expressed a boundary, right? You're not going to talk to me like you talk to the other people. You're not going to talk to me any kind of way, which shows number one, you respect yourself, right? But the other thing I like is that he accepted your boundary and he accepted it and he continued on with it. And this is a telltale sign, right, of if a person is going, if they don't respect your boundaries, move on. But he decided he wanted her, so he respected her boundaries.
Right.
So
That's
I
wonderful.
really love that. I'm going to switch the mic over to my partner, Michelle, the Golden Link. How are you?
Hey, ladies.
Hi.
I got a question.
We got
Why?
an answer.
You got an answer? Okay. How come every time we come here, which is Mondays, right? It's raining. All of the liquid sunshine.
That's it. I love it.
What's the answer?
Raindrops keep falling on my head.
Why do you think that's happening? Do you think it's like so people could sit and watch us?
I don't know.
I don't know.
You know,
Could
this way
be.
this way they can get out, of the rain.
I love
all
the
the
rain.
liquid sunshine.
I love the
I know you
rain.
love that liquid
I
sunshine.
do.
I know.
I
do too.
really do. I especially
I
like
so
it though from my bed with the window open.
Right, that's what I'm saying. This way people are home watching us,
Yes.
relaxing. It's raining outside.
I love it.
They don't have nowhere to go. So
Go
I'm hoping
easy.
that-
Go easy.
Oh, okay. So I do have 3 important celebrations to mention, and then we can continue on because I see you guys just get right into
Oh, we
it.
don't. We,
Y'all don't play.
Hey, family, Facebook family. Hi, YouTube family.
I'm always coming up here trying to play.
Girl.
Y'all just be like, let's get to work.
We
But
got
okay,
work
we got
to
work
do.
to do. But you know what? I just wanted to tell Natasha and yourself that I really love your support. And shout out to all the caregivers. And we really do have a good show. We do. Last week was amazing with the marriage. I got a lot of feedback. People said that video should be shared.
Yeah.
So make sure you're watching us. Make sure on YouTube you're sharing as well. You're subscribing and joining us, right? Because we have very good information.
Click, share, subscribe.
Yeah, Sisters Inspiring Transformation. And I do think we're doing some good work here.
Absolutely.
So with that said, we have 3 celebrations this week.
3.
3. We had the July 3rd, the Crown Act.
We'll talk about it.
I don't really want to talk about it. I just want to recognize that that it was an important day. Basically, it's just to protect people at work in the workplace, that let everyone know that, Black folk, we wear our hair how we want
Right.
to, and in so many different styles and different ways, and we shouldn't be discriminated against the fact that we can do that.
Right. So
And
it
so we're
supported
protected.
natural black
Right,
hair and
natural black
supported
hair.
ending hair discrimination. Do you know that act
No.
was put into
No,
law
I'm
in
just joking.
July 3rd, 2020?
Oh, I thought it was 19 in
Well,
2019 in California.
Well,
so different states.
yeah,
Remember,
well, no.
different states do different
so
things.
it began on July 20th, but you're right. The Crown Act passed in California in 2019, but
Right.
it didn't begin until July 30,
Right.
July 3rd, 2020.
Right, because
so you are
every,
correct.
Right, every state. Remember, that's why it's important to vote in your state and pay attention because, believe it or not, there are so many different laws
Yeah.
that apply to your state or my
Yeah.
state or whatever, and it's kind of crazy like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that was it. Check off that one. I got.
Hey, Sheila. Hi, my Ruby. Oh, my
hey,
God.
Ruby.
Welcome.
Okay, so the other one was July 4th.
Oh, jeez.
Oh,
Okay.
that's
Did you
Independence
enjoy
Day.
your July 4th?
Yeah, I saw the fireworks.
Did you have a cookout?
No, but I went to one,
Oh.
and my friend, a longtime friend from childhood, it was her birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And so she gave a big speech thanking everybody for coming out
Mhm.
and saying that she wanted to recognize somebody who was very important, that she'd been knowing since she was 5 and they were 4. And I'm like, Dad, I wonder who used to hang out with her. No, I'm just joking. So then come to find out it was me. She wanted to recognize me, so she presented me with a bouquet of flowers.
Oh,
and
that's
I thought
beautiful.
that was
Oh,
amazing.
And it was your
Right.
birthday, too, but she recognized you on her
Yeah.
birthday.
Well, you moving too fast because July 4th was her birthday and my birthday was what?
July 5th.
Ooh, let's give me a
Oh.
round of applause. I just wanted to thank
I got a birthday
That's-
gift for you.
What? You are the best. Yeah, it was
Happy
supposed to go by
birthday.
itself. Oh, thank you. Can I open it later?
You can.
Okay. Well, so I don't want to distract the show too much, but I can't believe we're like halfway through the year because I celebrate my birthday, Natasha, in case you didn't know, every 6 months. So that means it's 6 months past already since January. So
Yes,
my next birthday
yes.
is
Well, we close to being half birthdays because my birthday is January
Hers is
4th, so my
January.
half birthday is July 4th.
Oh, we gotta give you a round of applause for that.
Yes,
So-
I got to get into celebrating these half birthdays. I like that
Yes,
idea.
yes. So I'm
Twice a
having
year
a-
you get to celebrate.
Yeah, so I'm having a birthday January 5th, and you're invited.
Okay, thank you.
Every
Okay.
year she
All
does
right,
this. It's so cute.
So that's it. We can move on to the real stuff.
Good stuff.
That was just the fun stuff.
That was good
Okay.
stuff.
All right.
All right. So again, today's topic, Michelle, is communication, right?
Mhm.
We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and everything in between.
Mm-hmm.
We'll discuss how poor communication damages relationships, while effective communication builds, nurtures, and connects with communication. And so
You
we're
trying to
gonna.
tell me something? I don't communicate very well. But no, this is a good show for me too, because not only am I learning, well, how we're trying to help the audience, I'm learning as well. So I love this show because you guys, we come up with some good topics, and
Yeah.
communication is one that I'm working on. Remember, I had my tools, letting people, being a good listener. That's what I found out. I found out through this whole process that I need to work on listening. Okay, because I want to say something, don't want to forget what I gotta say, and this and that. And it's not really about what I need to say. Sometimes it's just about me listening. So that's what I appreciate about this show.
Why do you feel communication is so hard sometimes?
I think it's just the way you probably always did something. You know what I mean? Like maybe your family communicated a certain way. And then that's just what you're used to. It's like just because you communicate a certain way doesn't mean it's always the right way. Doesn't mean it's effective. But if you, as you go on and learn and grow, then you get tools like my little tools I have. And so, and that's all part of communicating. So you have to communicate. And then my thing is to learn how to listen. That's what I was explaining. That's what I realized about communication, how important it is. Because if I'm not listening to you, then what are we doing,
Yeah, and we're going to talk about some ways we can listen. Tasha, so why do you think communication is so hard sometimes? Explain it from your professional lens.
Well, communication is developed in patterns,
Right.
whether we recognize it or not. They're habitual patterns. And simultaneously, communication depends on the intrapersonal, which is you as the individual, and the interpersonal, you and your relationship in the dyadic relationship or whoever you communicate, processing at the same time. So, in other words, the dynamics of communication reside within the individual as well as in the relationship in the system.
Yeah.
So that's what makes it complicated because if each person have a different way of communicating or different communication styles, a lot of times people are communicating to respond and not necessarily listening. So Michelle is hitting it right on the point that is a good skill to learn because without the effective listening or listening to what you're being communicated to and just responding because you're responding to the tones, the actions, the behaviors, or even your own interpersonal experiences, then that's the place you're communicating from. And
Right.
people learn to communicate through observations,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You don't, no one sits you down and say, hey, take this communication class. I think the first time I heard about a communication class is when I hit college and everybody had to take communication 101, right? So we done learned how to communicate for over 18, 17 plus years. And now if we go to college and we're lucky to take a communication class, maybe we learn some of those skill sets. So it is through learning by example,
Right.
not, being taught by example, not being taught skill sets. And there later on in the show, we'll talk about different ways to communicate healthy and model healthy communication. But most of the time, people are not monitoring or understanding healthy versus unhealthy communication patterns
Right.
because you just communicate the way you're taught to
Right. You're
communicate.
not aware of the unhealthy patterns. And it's so funny because Michelle said something really pivotal. She said you kind
As
of
always.
she said you kind of mirror what you see, right? And so when I think
Yeah.
about growing up and our communication style, my mother used to have this really, I'm not going to say bad habit, but she used to have this habit of if she was angry at anybody, I don't care whether it was me, who she would just automatically shut down. Not
Right.
only would she shut down, but she would have this like screw face, like to make sure you knew she was angry, right? And so as I got older, I realized I had adopted that pattern, and I was so when I would get mad, it was like I'd shut down, but you would actually that's the nonverbal. You would actually see it on my face, and when I became aware of it, more conscious of it, I made it my business to practice not to do it because you have to unlearn what you learned.
So are you
Right,
saying
right,
that
yeah.
you have to have a poker face? Like if you're angry, like, like it's like sometimes I get upset, I'm like,
Right.
Like, should
Those
I
are
That's
not be
but
doing that? Or
Michelle,
those are
that's a form of communication. What you
right.
just did, that's a nonverbal
Verbal.
form of
Exactly.
communication. Let's
but it's
not
not
get this
healthy though.
confused.
I don't think it's
No, no,
healthy.
no. Let's not get this confused
Okay.
from my standpoint. You can communicate any feeling that you have. It's,
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
you know, for a very long time we hear the adage, the old adage is not what you say, is how you say it. It's
Right.
actually true. You can communicate you're angry. And what Sabrina just demonstrated, that my aunt Thelma, who's my aunt, would communicate through silence and nonverbal facial expressions so
Mm-hmm.
that her children knew she was angry at something. Now,
Mm-hmm.
she could have communicated that through words, and maybe it would have been a different response because Sabrina would have learned to pick up, oh, I can communicate anger through words as
As
opposed
opposed
through
to that's
nonverbals and
right.
action.
Right.
And
Okay.
then I guess throughout the segment, we'll talk about the pros and cons of it because
Mm-hmm.
sometimes maybe the nonverbals are what people need,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
However, I think we're trying to make sure that as we speak to our audience, that the audience, the goal is take a look at how you communicate, because the one of the things that I talk about is the way we communicate with others is demonstrated in how we communicate with ourselves. How
Right.
do we communicate in our own thoughts and in our own feelings, right?
Right.
So if we're communicating unhealthy in our own thoughts when we're thinking about stuff, that is what's going to come out. It's going to come out unhealthy because when we attempt to explicitly verbalize those thoughts and feelings to each other, we're probably communicating in an unhealthy pattern if it's unhealthy in our own heads.
That's
So
right.
we're just, what we like to do is, as we're talked through tonight, just really challenge our listeners to think about how you do communicate, and because what you communicate needs to be communicated, but how can you do it in a more healthier
And
dynamic?
a more healthier dynamics, right? And in the appropriate setting, right? Because
Right.
Right.
some every situation that makes, I'm going to use me as an example, makes me upset or angry does not call for me to have the screw face, because I think that my mother was using it more as an intimidating tactic,
Mm-hmm.
right? She was using it more
She
as a
wants y'all to
weapon
listen.
as opposed to just expressing how she felt. You know what I
Were you
mean?
afraid, like when she did that? Like, so is that like when the black woman give you the look? The mom, was it like that, or is this a different?
She was like,
She would give you a look,
she
you
be
knew not
mad,
to do
yeah.
nothing. Okay.
You like, mommy
Well, I
mad? We
think
gonna leave
that
mommy alone?
right.
'Cause
Right. And
I
you know
think
what
that's part
Sabrina
of our
got me
culture,
thinking,
right?
right?
That's a part of our
Because we
culture.
spend, right, we spend a lot of time together as kids, right? Because
mm-hmm.
it was just my grandmother who was her mother's sister, and I don't have that memory. I don't have that
Right.
version of my Aunt
Right.
Thelma. So now what I just thought about is what Sabrina is describing is how she learned to communicate from her mother. And I don't know, maybe my Aunt Thelma did do a screw face at work, but isn't it interesting for her to realize this is the way my mom would communicate to us as children, and then the children pick it up. But that may have not been the way my Aunt Thelma communicated to everyone else in the world when she was
Right,
angry.
Right.
right. So that's what it
So
is.
Right.
that
Like
just shows you
certain.
there how familiar family and familiar patterns get adopted by children. So
Mm-hmm.
again, as our listeners are thinking about what did you learn as a child on how you communicate, what nonverbal and verbal cues did you have? Because it is very different when a parent is communicating to a kid versus your mother. You see your mother now communicating with the people at the grocery store, the
Mm-hmm.
mailman, the people at work, her elders, her siblings, or
Mm-hmm.
her friends, because we do communicate with different relationships differently.
Differently.
Right.
Exactly.
And what about like sometimes my kids now, they're 27 and 21. They're like, "Mom, you don't read the room." Like you just like like you got to learn how to read the room. I'm like, "Okay, so I look like I got a lot of
That's
work to
that
do, ladies."
nonverbal communication. Hey,
Yes.
Poogie. Hey, Michelle. Thanks for joining us. We are talking about communications tonight. We're talking about the good, the bad, and
The ugly.
everything in between when it comes to communication. So let me ask you, ladies, a question. Tasha, I'm gonna start with you first. How did your family communicate growing up? What were one of their communication styles that you adopted?
My family was split, right? Because my mom had me when she was 16, and my grandmother was really the mother of the house because she probably was a hot 35, I guess. I never really calculated how old my grandmother was when I was
Mhm.
born, but she definitely wasn't in her 30s.
Mhm.
And so I remember my grandmother doing a lot of verbal communication with us. Like my grandmother would stop and explain things to us.
Oh
Oh,
She
yeah,
would
that's
say,
that
good.
was Aunt Helen.
if
Yeah.
she
That's
was
wonderful.
angry, she would discuss it with us. Now we got some threats
Oh,
in there, but even though grandma ain't never put her hand on nobody kid, I
No.
ain't never seen my grandmother hit nobody kid. But she would say, if you don't stop doing that, you're gonna get a spanking. So she
Mm-hmm.
would verbally give us cues. Then you got to think about me growing up with a 16-year-old mother.
Yeah.
Sometimes her expression would be through yelling and screaming,
Mm-hmm.
and it would be through aggression to some extent as well.
Mm-hmm.
But she would also, because she was the one that spanked us, she would also tell you why she was spanking you and spank you. So she always talked through it. So that example of what I say when we talk about communication is a word called like consensual communication,
Mm-hmm.
which it values both conversation and conformity. So they would have conversations with us to ensure that we were conforming to the family systems and values, but it
Mm-hmm.
was an open dialogue.
Yeah.
So I actually used to get spanked a lot. You know why? Because I would communicate back. So if they said something to me and I didn't like it, I would be like, I don't like that.
Right,
So
oh,
I
right.
did pick up a pattern, even if it appeared to be a little unhealthy, but I always felt like I had a voice.
You was able to,
So I got in
yeah,
trouble a lot for communicating back. I
yeah,
wasn't the quiet
yeah.
kid.
Hey, Keisha, how are you?
So I think that was a pattern that we observed. And again, it was, I grew up in a women dominant house. We didn't have males around. So the women, took over. We didn't have men intimidating or being bossy or
Yeah.
aggressive. I grew up in my household in a world where there was no misogyny, right? So
Oh,
I only know from being a youngster growing up how women operated, and everyone was very vocal and everyone communicated. Even if it was through conflict, people always had a voice. Everyone
right.
got to express what they needed to express.
Right. That's good. That's good. How about you, Michelle? How did your family communicate growing up?
well, I don't know. I'm sitting here trying to think about that as she was speaking, so hopefully I was listening. but no, I like that she was saying that, like, even though they were telling her stuff, she was able to communicate back.
Mm-hmm.
Although they might have spanked her, but at least she, spoke up for herself.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I was pretty much a quiet kid. Like I started talking a lot more later on in life, but I think I was a quiet kid. Maybe because my dad, he was very reserved, and he would sit in his green recliner and just like read the newspaper, and he didn't really talk much either until later on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And my mom was always very aggressive towards him, and so, but to me, she was very gentle.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
And then later
Tasha talked
on,
about that.
then later on, we had this table type like discussion where we would all sit at the table, the whole family.
Oh,
And then now,
nice.
no,
Oh.
everyone's talking at one time.
She said,
but we can hear and understand what each other is saying. But that's what we would
That's
do.
where you get it from.
That's where
Uh-huh.
because we're
There
all talking,
it is.
We're all talking at one time. Then that's when my dad started talking because before he didn't talk. Like when I was in my teenage years up to I graduated high school. So I'm talking like my dad really started opening up after college, and then my mom became like my best friend after college, and then my nieces. We all get at the kitchen table. And then we're just all talking. And nobody listen. I mean, we're listening and we're catching up. We could do that. Maybe we had a special skill. I don't know.
But
we were
Michelle,
listening. I don't
but
know.
what I hear is that as a child, there was this dynamic of low conversation, but maybe high conformity to and prioritizing harmony within the
Family,
family.
yep.
Like we're prioritizing our rules and standards, and you kind of know what they are. But then when as your parents saw their children and grandchildren come into adults,
Right.
it became more of a consensual conversation where we're having conversation with each other. So your
Right.
parents kind of adjusted to, oh, they're not children anymore.
Right,
I
I
can
think
talk
that's
to
what it
them
was.
like
Right.
adults.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's something, and I'm just throwing that out there. I may not be right, but thinking
I
about the
agree.
patterns
I agree. They
of
took on the role
communication.
like
Yeah.
you're a child, like stay in child's place, and adults talk. Like we don't communicate with the child. Like
Yeah.
that. It's just-
Well, that era was notorious for that,
Yeah.
And whatever happens at home stays at home. So it didn't really give you an opportunity to express, how you feel, what was going on in the home. That's good. So Facebook family, YouTube family, drop some in the chat. How did your family communicate growing up? What are some of the patterns you learned? While we're waiting on those those responses, I have another question. Okay. How does unspoken trauma affect how we talk to each other? How
I don't
does
think I have an answer.
unspoken trauma?
I'm gonna refer to our licensed psychotherapist to answer.
So,
that.
what about if you were silenced as a child? You might grow up believing your words don't matter.
Well, no, I don't think it was silence. I think I was just treated gently. Like I was really
Kid gloves.
Like, yeah, I was. Everyone treated me like a princess. Like, I was very, no one yelled at me. No one said I would get a spanking. Like that wasn't even part of the conversation.
Right.
I was never threatened. Like, oh, you'll get a spanking. None of that. It was always like very gentle.
Oh, Sheila said, "Live in silence, no crying aloud." Ooh, what you
Oh,
think about
wow,
that one,
right.
Tasha?
Right? So you can't even speak or express your feelings or emotions, right? So it's
Right.
really very, so that again is what we will probably call a protective pattern of communication, which is low in conversation, but high conformity to the family value system, prioritizing harmony, no, and obedience. And those conversations, there's often less room for open discussion, and you just focus on establishing what the rules are. So it's almost like you're living by the rules. So is what do you say? Do as I do and not as I say. So kids are learning through a lot of role modeling, but again, if you're not able to express your thoughts and feelings, you're just then acting and behaving, and that will create a lot of impulse control, right? Because you're just acting out because you can't communicate because you're not taught to express that or even express it through nonverbal
Yeah.
communication like tears.
Right.
So.
Right. So
And
you.
that could be traumatic, right? Because what we know about trauma is trauma wires the brain to expect rejection or conflict, right? And so either your responses to it is either going to probably be avoiding to shut down or the pain or to lash out to protect yourself before anyone else can hurt you, right? And it comes in many different ways, right? Because the example I gave earlier is when I told my husband, don't talk to me that way. He understood that he had to use gentle gloves. He couldn't talk to me like a dude on the street corner.
Right. Right.
And that was a protective way for me because if you guys put my story together, have y'all listened to these podcasts over the weeks, I didn't grow up with men in the house. So I didn't grow up with a man coming to me like, what's up? And
Right.
talking all crazy. I grew up with how women talk to each other, kind. And again, even when I was getting spanking, my mother was explaining to me why she was spanking me. And it was kind and through a kind voice. Sometimes she would yell, but I didn't grow up with someone not honoring who I was, right? We
Or
were all called by
suppressing
our
or suppressing
names.
your voice.
Exactly. And we were called by our names, even though I think my family preferred to use middle names. We were called, I was called Monique. My sister was called Nicole. We wasn't called, hey, come here, that child. Or, we were communicated to like we mattered.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, when I hear somebody telling me what's up, I'm like, what's up? What does that mean? You say hello, hello, may I speak to
Exactly.
Natasha on the
Right.
phone, right?
And I
And
think
I communicate that way as well. Even now on text, my kids say, "Ma, you too formal on text," because it's very hard for me to write a text message to anyone, including my children, without a salutation. So if it's the afternoon, I go, "Good afternoon, daughter. Good afternoon, son," and they like, "Ma, you don't need to be doing all of that." And I'm like, "But I don't know. I
that's
just can't
beautiful.
stop."
I can't
That's
take the
beautiful.
broken text. Please do not text me with what's the new text where they don't put the whole word, but you're supposed to know what the three
Oh.
letters mean. I do
Oh,
not
no,
do
no,
that
yeah,
to
yeah.
me.
I don't know nothing about
You will
that.
lose me. I'm not a big text
Yeah.
person, period.
you like the
I
phone.
would prefer the
She likes the
phone.
phone.
And so for
I
that
like the
reason,
text.
I ignore a lot of my text messages. So forgive me if I've ignored your
You
text
telling
messages.
on yourself.
But I would prefer to talk to that person, hear their voice, and have a conversation.
Right. So if I know I want to get to Sabrina, I have to call her. If I'm
Mm-hmm.
texting, I'm like, oh, she didn't think about my text. But anyway, yeah, but that's all very interesting because, like, even with communication today with my niece, she has young boys, 6 and 4. And I like how she's trying to communicate with them. Like they know about breathing already. She also teaches them about using your words, So I think now people are focused more in the Black community on communicating. Whereas before, I don't really think it was a thing. Like we really thought about it. We just did what we did. But as far as me, I like for people to treat me delicately. And if somebody's using harsh words, I think maybe I get offended because I grew up like that. But it is hard because my husband, he grew up with a mom with 7 kids. So that's different. That's like your mom. So, it's probably in the house where you better do what I say or I'm going to get a spanking, like you, Natasha. So that kind of thing. So in a way, it's almost kind of hard sometimes because he have to remember, like, I didn't grow up the way you grew up, you know. So
That's another good key point.
That is a thing.
So, Tasha, let me ask you a question. Input is output. Let's talk about that a little bit. What we
Well, yeah,
go ahead. What we
go ahead.
say to
It's how
people
people
is
respond to you,
how
right? We just
people
talked a little
respond.
bit about that. Yep.
Yeah. So how?
So if
Go ahead.
So if you speak with criticism or sarcasm, people will tend to respond to you that way in terms of defending themselves instead of hearing you, right?
Yeah.
If you speak with clarity and respect, you are more likely to be met with the same, right? So we just talked about that in a couple of examples of it. Now, I'm sure when I said to my husband, "Don't speak to me or call me on the phone and just say what's up," I didn't say it with that level of nice tone. I was
Right.
very sassy during those days and probably a little sarcastic. But
Right.
again, he heard the message, right?
Right.
And he could see that that message was, I was delivering a message that was for him to hear, almost giving him a roadmap on how to get to my heart. But he knew that the tone and the sarcasm was not meant for him because he wasn't that type of dude anyway.
Right. But I think
So,
though, Tasha,
I,
you did it with clarity and respect, which is why you
yes,
got it back.
Right.
yes,
That's important.
yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And even like I say, even though it was a little sass on it, it was with clarity and respect because it really kind of commanded him to listen. Like if I want to continue to call this young lady on the phone and kind of rock with her, I gotta at least say hi, Natasha. How you doing? Or hello, may I speak to Natasha?
So
Yeah.
you were just being
So I
assertive.
think that's the case, right? And
Yeah.
I'm sure we all our listeners having examples of being an experience where you may have walked away. I would hope people are self-reflective and have that experience. Like, wow, I just really communicated that in a way, and it didn't end the way I thought it would end. But I kind of actually started that. I have my own examples of that. There's a couple of places that really trigger me, and I could go off the deep end, and I always walk like, oh Lord, why did I just do that? Thank God these people won't probably have to see me again. And you really don't get the outcome you want
Right.
sometimes when
That's
you
right.
communicate in
Right.
the
You got to be
way.
conscientious of how you're communicating. But my Ruby said, coming from the silent generation, your place was to be seen and not heard. However, I had a hard head, so I got a few deserves switches. Didn't we all? Didn't we all?
I did.
Okay.
No.
Yeah. I know, right?
Right, but after the silent generation was the baby boomers,
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so they definitely was gonna get a lot of switches. So the next generation will be you were breaking patterns, right?
Right,
Because
right.
it was no longer. If you think about the time frame of that and what was happening during that generation, it was no longer appropriate for us to be silent. We were advocating, we were fighting for civil rights,
Yep.
we were taking our stance here in America, we as African Americans. So when your parents was like, shush, be quiet, that wasn't really even appropriate for your generation, Ruby. So of course you're gonna get switches, but it's your generation that shifted us into this place that we can really now have this conversation about having a voice and communicating.
Right.
So thank you, Ruby, for taking those switches for us.
Thank you. Right. Right. And I like this, and I like it because now we're going to start to have healthy communication
Right. Right.
as we talk about it more. And it's not easy, right?
And-
It's not like overnight you're going to have this amazing communication jargon or healthy communication style. It takes work.
Right. And thinking about switches and hitting and things like that, even in the teacher profession, when I was younger in fifth grade, poor Edward Lowry, I don't know where he is today, but they used to
she
take
gave
him.
his
I guess
whole
full government
name, the whole government
They used
name.
to take Mrs. Seach, my fifth grade teacher. She used to take him in the closet, and she used to bang them hands. So
Oh, wow.
you can't do that anymore. So I just said that to say things have changed. But yeah, so the teachers used to be allowed to hit the students way back when. You guys never knew that?
Yeah.
Oh no, we knew that.
Okay.
Yeah,
We
most of our
knew.
parents ain't education.
But it wasn't just the teachers, right? It was even the whole neighborhood.
The whole
Like
they
if you
switched,
were doing
right.
something, the whole neighborhood was
Right.
was after you. So that's not.
Well, maybe that's why I was so good. I didn't want to get
You
hit
didn't want to get hit.
at school, at home, or nowhere. So I was like, I'm going to be quiet.
So Michelle, you and I are going to do a bad communication example. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're going to have Tasha break it down a little bit.
Okay.
You ready?
Yep. I'm ready.
Okay. You never listen to me.
What now, Sabrina?
See, this is what I'm talking about.
Okay. Okay, I think scene.
All right,
Cut.
Tasha, what you think about that?
Cut. Did we do a good acting job?
Right, right. Well, no, y'all did a wonderful job. That's probably a scene that everybody can relate to, right?
You
It
never
wasn't
listen to
because
me.
when you start talking about you never listen to me, you probably interrupted somebody because if they never listen, they don't want to listen right now neither.
Right.
But in that example, I think Sabrina started with an accusation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think her message was trying to at least begin a conversation about how can we communicate, and I can assure that as in our dynamic that you are listening to me. But she started with some nonverbals, with like rolling her eyes and maybe a dismissive tone, and then pointing her finger. You never listen to me. And so then Michelle comes on the defense because she's now being accused of something. So she's scrolling on the phone and sighing, like, what now? Right? Because if she hadn't listened before, she don't want to
Every
listen now.
time Sabrina does this.
Right. And right. And then Sabrina's response is even a little, it takes it down a further, like more healthier pattern because she still did not verbalize her needs in her last response.
Right.
Her last response says, see, this is what I'm talking about. That's open ended. That right there, if that argument would have continued, we would have never got back to the discussion of trying to have Michelle understand that Sabrina wants to be heard and listened to.
Mm-hmm. So
So
that's
you can see how it what we got here about communication being an emotional mirror. Your input shapes your output. So Sabrina goes in with the drive or the motive to have a discussion about listening to her, and then the way she goes into it and even her secondary response will take you to a whole nother place, and you'll never get to the point of getting helping Michelle understand how to listen to you when you're
right.
communicating with her.
And also the tone, it was a little bit combative, and so again, input output that could easily put her on the defensive to what I was saying. It might even have her, depending on her style, it may even have her shutting down, not to
Right.
continue on after this conversation.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
I forgot my
Yes.
prop, but I'll do it for the scene too.
You forgot what?
My prop.
Oh,
I was supposed to be scrolling on my phone.
oh, that's all right. You ready for the next one?
Yep.
Okay. Hey, Michelle. Can I share something that's been on my mind?
Oh, of course. I'm listening.
I felt hurt earlier when I tried to share my idea with you. Your opinion means a lot to me.
Okay, I don't know my line. Let's see. I'm sorry. I was so distracted. Thank you for letting me know. Tell me again. I want to hear you.
Oh,
we gotta give ourselves
you want to hear something funny? Even as we did that, right? The funny thing is, the energy felt better, if that makes sense.
Right.
That was amazing.
And I personally don't think you needed to pick up your paper, Michelle. You just got to give a little bit in your acting skills, because I think you would have gave Sabrina the same response. Only because we spend time together and I'm learning to get to know you. I think you used it because you want to stay on point. But I think if you would have just flowed with it, it would have been a very similar response than what
I
we wrote
treat
on the
her
paper.
like with, delicate gloves.
Yes,
I say thank
yes.
you for my gift. I don't think I said
You're
it
welcome.
properly. I want to give her.
Yes. And that was an example of open and an empathetic communication dynamic. And those are found in relationships or with people who generally are open to have consensual discussion, who is looking to speak and be listened to, and then also to get responses and hear those responses. And so that was a good example of how, when you start off, you can get your needs met if your motive is, I really do want to get to the bottom of this. So the way I'm going to bring this to my partner, to my family member, to my best friend, to my children, is because the ultimate goal is for us to continue the discussion.
Right.
And I'm sure, like, if this was an extended discussion, it probably would have went into them actually sharing what's going on in those moments where, Sabrina feel hurt because her idea didn't get a response, and Michelle talking about, or actually having some self-awareness about, well, why am I so distracted when she's talking to me? Why didn't I get her response? So again, it goes that communication as an emotional mirror. It also allows you to look into yeah, what am I doing to facilitate these responses and the responses that I'm giving out? What am I giving? What's coming back to me as well?
Right. And you know what I liked about that as well, the second skit, is it showed a good form of collaboration. And I think that collaboration is the best form of communication because it shows that, number one, we're advocates for ourselves, right? I was able to articulate how I felt. And I think it showed you showing empathy for me so much so that now you're leaning in and paying attention to me. And I think that makes for a healthy and good communication.
Yeah, I think we got a good relationship, a healthy one.
Yeah, yeah, that was good.
Yeah,
that was good. Woo!
Woo. Okay, Natasha.
Yeah,
what
and
we
in
got
collaboration, it's not just one person. It's two people, which I like.
Right, right, right. Well, that's why I use the word kind of consensual too,
Yeah,
because consensual allows us to consent to healthy dynamic and conversations with each other. So
yeah,
we both invested in it.
yeah.
And then, unfortunately, we can have, consensual relationships where we communicate healthy with, and then some of our relationships that communication is not so healthy, but that don't mean you can't communicate healthy to the persons. You just know
Exactly.
what you may get back, and you just kind of keep like pounding it down until they get it. And hopefully, those discussions where you can role model healthy communication, others will eventually pick it up and know, okay, if I want to talk with this individual in my life, I have to lean into that side of it. You know what they
Right.
say, love conquers all.
Yeah.
So we hope that, good role model and a healthy patterns will conquer the unhealthy patterns.
Right.
And what's that little saying? You get more honey, more flies with honey than
Yes, you get more bees with
bees with
honey
honey.
instead of
Yeah,
sour
something,
milk or
right?
something like
Something,
that.
something.
Yes.
Look, I jacked that all up. But basically, I
But
think
it's,
to
it's
be
good.
nice, to people. Yeah, you get
Yeah.
what you want. Usually, I'm nice to everybody, and I get free stuff and everything.
She said I get free stuff and everything. Now we going down a whole
Okay,
different.
all right, let's stay focused. Okay, I
Yeah.
just found out I have little.
So, Tasha, we're going to jump to non-violent communications. Or, I'm sorry, the four C's of
Uh-huh.
communications, and then we're going to play another game before if we could tally it out. Let's talk about the four C's right now
Right, right. And how to master them,
and
right?
how to
So
master them.
so I will say the four C's, and maybe you and Michelle can give an example of what that means, right?
Okay.
So the first one is clarity,
Mm-hmm.
right? Say what you mean to say clear and direct. Avoid vague language or being passive aggressive. Now, this may be really, really hard for people because sometimes it's hard to communicate directly when you're trying to process your thoughts out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it may require another skill set that we probably will talk about later on in the podcast. So y'all heard early on in the podcast about how to really actually begin to process your feelings.
Mm-hmm.
What I will say is that you recognize that you are not in a state to communicate clearly, but you still communicate. Understand that they may not turn out right for you.
Right.
Right. So when you communicate clearly, Sabrina or Michelle, can you give an example of what that may look like?
Okay, go ahead, Sabrina.
Well, before I get to that part, I just want to say that when we don't, some things may prevent us from communicating clearly, right? Like if I'm in a situation or I'm in a place that may have triggered me, right? My communication is not going to be clear because I'm thinking of it from my perception. And so it may come off assertive, aggressive. It may come out as fearful, guarded, lack of trust. So it depends on the situation that will determine how my communication comes out. So barring any triggers,
Right.
clear communication is being concise. Um, Definitely, I would do the nonverbal looking you in your eye, having empathy, and just making sure that I take my time to express how I feel. Is that what you were looking for, Tasha?
Yes, yes. And I think by you giving us the example of when it may be difficult for it to happen, what I would ask our listeners to do is during those times, just have the self awareness. Depending on the person, place, or thing, if that is actually happening and you can't communicate clear and direct, is it even worth you communicating at that time? So I'm just going to use an example because most of the time it's me and my husband because my children are grown and they live someplace else. If I am triggered by him and I can't communicate directly what my needs are, I may just forego that moment in time because it will be another time or another example I can give him later on in the day and say, hey, earlier when you did that, that was very triggering for me. So you probably saw a shutdown, but this is what I wanted to communicate with you clear and direct. So we do have the power to control how we behave and or communicate once we're triggered. Now, some
Right.
people going in on the side like, well, sometimes I just got to give it out. And by no means am I trying to sit up here and say you don't have to give it out. But I'm asking you to do is if you want to develop healthy patterns, just have self-awareness that every time you get triggered, it don't have to be addressed in that moment, especially in the relationships you want to maintain and the relationships you want to develop trust in and the relationships you want to have longevity in.
Exactly. And that was a good point. It is okay sometimes to use that avoiding style,
Right.
right? So like you said, if I'm being triggered, but there's some more stuff that goes behind that. If I'm being triggered, it's okay in that moment because we talked about earlier how my mother shuts down and just gives you
Right.
screw face. But there are some situations where you just need to take a minute, breathe in what's going on, and then maybe address it a little later so that it doesn't come out
Right. Nasty.
nasty.
Right. Okay.
I put myself on adult timeout all the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Call
That's
it
a
the
good one.
adult timeout because
Right.
I'm being
Sometimes when you're done.
self-aware.
Right.
I could, sometimes after a long day of work, I'm not irritable, but I feel fatigued. Right. And then my husband's been out there playing with the dogs all day and he may want to come at me with all this stuff. And I have to say, okay, listen to him loud and clear. And I let him get it all out. And the whole time I'm thinking, can he really hurry up? And then I'll be like, and I'll say, I'll listen. And then I'll say, you know what? Let me go to the bathroom. And when you come upstairs, we could talk about that further because that's the adult timeout. I'm giving him empathy. I allowed him to talk, but I really don't have a response for him right now because I'm feeling a little fatigued. I've probably been talking for 5 hours straight, right? And so I'll go up, take a shower, wash my face, whatever I do. Maybe sometimes just sit down and put the TV on. And by the time he come up, then we revisit the conversation.
Right.
So
That's a good
he
one.
never know that I was triggered because I let him speak. I responded with him with empathy, and I was direct and clear about what I needed in the moment. And
Right.
all is well in the McCartney household. We still had the same conversation 10 minutes
Great.
later. As opposed, I would have said, "Don't you see? I just got off of work. I just finished talking for 5 hours. Can you
Right.
give me a break? Give me a timeout." That wouldn't have been healthy.
Right, because that could elevate the communication, right? That's when it starts to go
It would
awry.
break down.
Right, break to yep, yep.
Yeah.
So you want
And
to
then
give
that will
a
become our pattern, and
example?
that pattern is not healthy.
That's not
So we'll
healthy.
move on to
Oh, well,
conciseness.
did
Wait,
I
she
want to
didn't-
give
she
the
wanna answer.
clarity? I would just want to give the example we have for
Good,
clarity.
good. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so this is good. This is like a marriage question. It says, "You never help me." Instead of doing that, say, I feel overwhelmed, and I would love your help with dinner tonight. That sound better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was the example.
Yeah, because you never help me is vague, right? It's really not saying what
What's
your
the
problem
problem,
is.
right.
And so we have to learn to speak with clarity and don't assume
The person
that the
knows.
person knows. You have to be able to articulate what is the matter so that they can respond
Right,
properly.
and then they can help you with what
Right.
really you need help with at
Right.
that moment.
Mhm.
Okay, go ahead. Oh, we're on the next one.
Okay, consciousness.
Yeah, conciseness.
Oh, I see
You get to the
consciousness.
point,
Okay.
right? You get to the point without unnecessarily rambling. Long-winded messages dilute the impact, and you also lose people, right? And sometimes people that is a communication pattern, right? Because sometimes people got to go. I know this is another saying I used to hear. You got to go all the way down the mulberry bush to get to the point.
To get to
Right,
the
just get
point.
to the point,
like,
right?
what's the
Because that will help generate more healthy, open, empathetic dialogue.
Right. And it's funny, Tasha, because when I think about that, right, I think everybody could be guilty of it, but when I think of that, this example comes up, right? So I really want ice. I'm driving in the car with my husband, and I really want ice cream. But instead of me telling my husband that, baby, can we go get ice cream? I'm sitting there like, mad and you know you never do what we want to do. Why how come we can always do what you want to do? And if I could just go get some, you know, like instead of just
want some
telling
ice
him
cream.
I want ice cream, I
Right.
went all the way
Way
around the block just to say that I want ice cream.
Right. And partly when you recognize stuff like that, that's a clear sign that y'all probably already have an unhealthy communication pattern because you then have to question, well, why did I do all of that instead of saying I want ice cream, something so simple? And there could be a lot of things that you uncover that you and your partner, your sister, your mom, or relationship, your children, that y'all can just sit down and talk about what it actually is versus continuing these unhealthy patterns, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
You want to do the example for that one?
No, great, you do it.
No, I'm good.
So this one says, the example says, I felt hurt yesterday when you ignored my calls. Perfect, to the point.
Yeah.
It's not ambiguous. You don't have to sit there and think about
out
what
what
the
they
heck are they
saying.
talking
Right.
about, right? And then the not good answer is, yesterday I called you and then I thought about how you didn't call me back and maybe you were mad at me and I don't know why you were mad at me, but I did try to call you yesterday and you didn't answer my call. It's like, oh my gosh.
All around about. And I really do not like when somebody says, oh, well, I thought you was going to do this or I thought you was going to say that. And I just really don't like that. That just pops in
Well,
my
you know,
head, so-
I got a good example too, because this is very, you know, we're humans and
Right.
it's very interesting and these dynamics. So I think this would be a good example to give the listeners. So as people may know, I have a son and a daughter, and my daughter is extremely bright like her mother, but we always say my son is the smartest person in the family, right? So when Chase was about maybe 11 or 12, it was a Saturday, and we were cleaning up, right? And I left my room and I walked down the hallway to his room and I said, Chase, you up cleaning up? And he was like, yeah, mom, I'm up cleaning up. And I must have rambled out probably 4 or 5 things I wanted him to do. And because I come from a family where you can respond back, right? And I passed that down to my children, Chase said to me, okay, and it was magical, right? Because he know his mother. He said, okay, mom, you just told me about 4 or 5 things what you want me to do. How do you want me to prioritize that? I about to fall on the
That's
floor.
beautiful.
That
That's
was a
beautiful.
magical
That
moment
is, see, that's
because
how we
he was
need to
more
do,
concise
right.
and direct than I
Right.
was.
Right.
And what he understood non-verbally is we cleaning up and we got to get this done. And he know to make mommy happy. Sometimes you got to do it the way she want. So when
Right.
he asked me, you just told me 5 or 6 things to do. How do you want me to prioritize that? Like I said, I almost fell on the floor. And it was in that moment, I looked at my son and I'm like, look at you. You right. That was not effective communication. So I said, son, the reality is I don't need you to prioritize it, but if we're gonna go to the movies tonight, I need all of that done before we leave the house at 5 o'clock today. And then he went on and did what he had to do. I went on, everybody went on and did what they had to do, and we made it to the movie. But he
And I
was the
bet
one
you
that
he a good
initiated the
listener.
conciseness and the directness.
Right,
He's a
right.
good listener, right? Yeah.
Oh no, this kid is a man. He has gotten us out of a lot of family arguments. Like that's why I say we
He's
call Chase
amazing.
the
So
smartest one in the house because
okay.
between my daughter, my husband, and me, we could blow up the house and Chase be sitting there looking at us like we crazy, and he'll come with a two-liner, and we all feel embarrassed and go on to our neutral
Right.
corners.
He's the sensible
So,
one. That is
Well, that's good. At
funny.
least you need one person like that in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
family.
yeah. No, but you're right. And you know, this communication doesn't happen. You know, effective communication doesn't happen overnight. There are still
No.
more parts to this. We're just giving kind of an overview of what it would look like if you did have effective communication and the output of it, as opposed to if you didn't.
Okay, I think we're out of time. We didn't do consistency.
no, we
No,
got
we got
3
more
more
time.
minutes.
We
So
got-
let's
we
get
have
to
time.
the
Okay.
Yeah, let's get to the last two.
Last two. Okay, go
So
ahead.
the second one is consistency. Your words, your tone, and your body language should match. Mixed signals can cause confusion. And along with that, if we all of what we've been talking about is the words that you use, your tone that you use, and your body language is being interpreted as you're communicating as well. So I think we all should be mindful of that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and it's so funny because if you have this look of disdain on your face, right, for
Right.
your spouse, like, but
And
you say,
saying,
yeah,
I'm fine.
I'm
Then
okay.
you're really not. Right.
Giving out those mixed
So that's the mixed
right,
signals.
Be consistent, right?
Okay. And then the last one.
The last one is courtesy, right? Courtesy. Speak with respect, even in a disagreement. Harsh words build walls. Courtesy helps to build bridges.
Oh, I
So
like that.
just being kind and courteous to people will get you further. It's like what Michelle say, you get more bees with
Get free
honey than
stuff.
sour milk.
Right, you get free
Yeah.
stuff.
That is, she said you get free stuff.
And you get discounts.
Look, Michelle, I agree with you. I had to teach my husband that, right? When we in certain places, just kind of say, "Good morning, sir. How are you doing today?
Yeah,
Please, thank you.
right.
You know, excuse me." Those words matter because
Matter.
you know when you're approaching someone, especially a stranger, you don't know what they going through
You
and what
do
they day
not.
been
You
like.
do
Mm-mm.
not.
It don't cost you anything to be
At
kind and
all. At
courteous.
all.
No.
And that's why I
Yeah.
make it a practice to do it every day. I remember one year I was at church and they were having some event. And so I went in the evening and there was a young lady sitting next to me and they were doing a concert, one of the artists. And so the pastor told us to get up and hug our neighbor. This was, before we could, the pandemic, and you could hug. And so the girl leaned in to hug me, right? So when I hugged her, she was trying to pull back. So I said, nope, you're going to get one of these good old hugs. And she started crying. And I'm like, oh, God, what's the matter? She said, I asked God, if you're real, let somebody hug me tight tonight.
Oh
That's
wow.
amazing.
And I said, oh, my goodness.
My son gives good hugs. Oh my goodness, that's beautiful.
Ugh.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this
All
was
right, this was amazing,
amazing.
as
But I do
always.
want to say that we are going to have a part 2 of couples, right?
Everybody loves it so
Oh
much.
yeah, Rodney
Yeah,
and
we
his
wanna
wife
bring them
really
back.
wants to talk about the beginning of their relationship. And how it all started, because he did mention that they were on the brink of divorce, so he wants to kind of bridge
Did
all
they
of that
actually
in.
separate, or we got to find out on part 2?
We got to find out on part 2. I'm not going to tell you. And we're going to bring Tasha and Sean back, and we're going to have another couple on, another nice surprise.
Okay.
So we will have a part 2.
And my husband
that.
won't be there. He have to watch mom. So.
Aw, that's all right.
Well, he's listening.
He's
He's
listening.
listening.
He's
And then
listening.
I think we're going to have a part 2 next week of wrapping up communication because we have
Communication.
so much more information we wanted to share tonight.
Yes, absolutely. And
Go
we
by
have
so
a
quick.
phenomenal game I want to play with you guys
Oh, good.
Yes.
with communication. The skits was amazing. Thank you for
Oh.
playing with me.
Maybe I can be in your movie.
She's so funny. Oh, we gonna find a part for you. Absolutely. So tonight was great. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Facebook family. Thank you, YouTube family. We love you. We hope you have an amazing night. If you like what you saw, please click, subscribe, share, and we'll see you back next Monday. We love you. Have an amazing week.
We've been
Thank
strong
you.
for so
Bye-bye.
long.